engines during the war against Japanese and the Nazis. Okay? But we come here to close your eyes and to imagine folks coming from the south, coming from sharecropping, from the plantations, from the land in the south, or coming from Yemen, or coming from Italy, coming from Spain, Scotland. What it meant for them to come from the countryside and see this massive building. What it meant to get on a trolley, because all the area you'll drive around began to have homes. So people would get off. 15,000 people worked here. And they would come every morning. They would have their lunch, and then they leave. Shift after shift after shift. We come here because it's a way to talk about the birth of the economic American dream of the 20th century, and also the end of the American dream of the 20th century. The birth of mass production. So the machinery, it's 55 buildings, everything was made here, from the sewing of seats for the cars, to making the dashboard, to the bumping of different parts for the automobile. Okay? But we come here not only, but this is what sort of, people will say about Detroit, well, the auto industry left, or the world became competitive, and that's why Detroit is where it's at. It's the end of the auto industry. We don't come here for that reason alone. We come here as part of the Boggs Center to share this tour because we believe it's the end of an epoch in human history. An epoch in human history that started 700 years ago. 700 years ago, when people were pushed off the land in Europe, when the slave trade begins, when capitalism begins, when individualism begins, when racism begins, when women's way of knowing gets destroyed, and there's the burning of the witches in Europe. Right? We come here because land, as we know, and most of you have been all raised with this, indigenous folks and native folks did not see the land as a resource. They saw it as something that was part of their lives for ever and ever, right? And the whole seventh generation. So we come here because we believe we're at the end of an epoch in human history, and therefore the birth of a new epoch in human history. And what that means is your generation, and very few generations have this opportunity, are not only talking about creating a new system, right? So I was raised in the 60s, we talked about a new system, right? We called it, some people called it socialism, people called it communism, in reaction to capitalism. We're saying we're at a stage now where the whole mode of production and the whole culture has an opportunity to change. Not only because of what this place represents, but because you have all been the products of the humanizing movements, starting with with Rosa Parks and the civil rights movement and the Montgomery bus boycott, right, in 1955. We had a gentleman yesterday at the meeting talking about his son with a disability. You know, I have a son with a disability, and there's no doubt that they're able to live dignified lives. Some folks, because of that movement that starts with Rosa Parks. Right, starts with a movement, not Rosa, but with the movement of Montgomery. So we come here also because Jimmy Boggs wrote in this book, 1963. What happened in 1963? This is pretty warm out here.
Assassination of JFK.
Assassination of JFK, okay, what else?
Birmingham.
Birmingham? What about Birmingham?
Well, the bombing of the churches and the massive resistance in Birmingham.
Okay, okay. So we have the picture of the Birmingham movement with the dogs. If you've seen Eyes on the Prize with the dogs and the hoses, and it's both a reminder of the courage as well as the pain people went through. What else in 63?
This is the March for Freedom and Jobs in Washington.
Martin Luther King first comes to Detroit in June of 63 and gives the I Have a Dream speech, and then a few months later goes to DC and does it. It's also when Malcolm X comes to Detroit and does the grassroots leadership conference that Jimmy and Grace organize, and gives a speech called The Message to the Grassroots.
Yeah.
So in 63, Jimmy writes this book. He was working at Jefferson Assembly, which is up the street here, and there were 20,000 folks working there at that time. And he saw robots coming into the factory, particularly in the body shop. And he said for the first time in human history, people are going to have to ask the question, what kind of work will people do?